typically the cycle goes like this. They have some sort of need, right? They identify it might be a year out, might be 2 years out, might be 3 years out, 4, whatever, depending on the size of that need. They identify the requirement, and then they start to develop that requirement internally on the government side. And then at some point they say, okay, well, we really need contractors for this, and or we need to purchase materials for this, or whatever it is that they're doing. So they'll issue typically some sort of request for information. So it's what they call a sources sought out to industry, and it's posted typically in a public place like beta.sam.gov or through the Intelligence Community Acquisition Resource Center.
Now, is this the same as like an RFP?
Not quite. We're not quite at the RFP stage yet. Okay. So the request for information is really just a survey that the government is doing to say, who could do this work? Like, here's some guidelines on what we're looking to procure. Who could do this work? Could a small business do this work? They have thresholds they have to meet and goals they have to meet for small businesses. They have goals they have to meet for service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses like GOAL. They have thresholds for women-owned small businesses, hub-zone businesses, aide businesses, that sort of thing. So they have to do research to determine what the best avenue of approach is. So they'll issue the sources sought. They'll have a number of responders. And based on those responses, they'll use that data to say, okay, well, we didn't get enough small business responses, so we have to put this out as what they call a full and open competition. Full and open just means anybody can bid on it. Typically, those favor large defense contractors because their past performance, what they've done, their book of work, is a lot more relevant to what's being solicited. So they have different options. They can do full and open. They can do what's called set-asides for small businesses. They have all sorts of different acquisition strategies. They can use what's called other transaction authority, OTAs. They have a bunch of different options that they can use to acquire the work. It just depends on what they need. But anyways, once they get the sources sought, they do the market survey, then they determine their acquisition strategy. And at some point, they might hold an industry day, which just invites people to come on out and talk with the government and hear from the government on what they're looking for, what they're looking to acquire. And those are typically pretty popular. Sometimes they'll hold one-on-one sessions where you can sit down and talk with them about what their needs are. Once those are done, and those aren't always held, but once those industry days are done, months go by. Like I said, everything takes forever. This whole process is really long.
Right.
Maybe they'll send you a draft request for proposal. Now, one of the things that the government doesn't understand about industry contractors is how much time and money and people go into responding to their requests. We spend a lot of money and a lot of time dissecting the requirements word for word, understanding what they're looking for, trying to make assertions as to what they're really getting at when they ask certain questions. So we put a lot of energy into that, and this is the case for most contractors. We spend a lot of money on what's called B&P dollars, our bid and proposal dollars, towards looking at these sorts of things. So if we're lucky enough to get a draft, that's typically the point where we'll actually start to form a proposal response, and that proposal has to be compliant to all the requirements. That means everything that they put in there. If they say you need to wear blue socks, we have to say we are going to wear blue socks.
It'll literally get down to details that nuance.
Yeah, not typically blue socks.
Well,
yeah. But in the requirement, it'll spell out. It'll say things like the contractor shall, show up to work every day from 9 to 5. Okay. Well, then, in our response, we have to be compliant. We have to say we'll show up from 9 to 5. If you're not compliant, they just throw your proposal out right away. So all that money you just spent on bid and proposal is right out the window. So the first thing with responding is to always be compliant. So we get that first. And then they'll score you. Typically, they have different rating metrics. These are typically put out in the requirements of how well you responded technically to what they're asking for. how well your management scored. And they always say that proposals aren't read, they're evaluated. Well, of course they're read, but that's how I've always heard that terminology. But they evaluate it. They look for strengths and weaknesses in your offering, and they try to score it on an objective basis. So if you get to the point where, a draft RFP is out, we're building our proposal, and then eventually, they'll have some question and answer sessions, and eventually you get to a final RFP, and that's when we're full blown. Like by that point, we should almost be done with our proposal. And we're turning small dogs into puppies, as we say. We're really just refining what our solution is, and making sure we hit all those high marks and providing the best possible answer to the government, and really pulling in our knowledge and expertise across the company and across our team of companies, because we always work in teams. So at that stage, the RFP will have a date, and you send in your proposal and wish for the best. Now what I just mentioned sometimes takes years to get to that point. Let's say you win. All right. This is where it gets fun, because now
what?
Now your competitors can protest, right? So you just spent years and a lot of money on this stuff, and then you get down to sending in this proposal you spent all your time and money and effort and energy on, and a lot goes into it, and then somebody says, that wasn't fair. So they protest. So they put in a protest. There's a few mechanisms you can put in a protest through the Government Accountability Office, or through things like the Small Business Administration, if you don't think that the company's a small business. And that delays the process even further. So that can push it back. I've seen them last a couple of years, protests. So I talked about it being a marathon. That's one of the reasons. We have things we started bidding on 2-3 years ago that we're just now coming to fruition or waiting on. So at the end of the day, what happens is the government sits down. They have a team of people that look at it, they rate it, they evaluate your proposal. And at the end of the day, there's just one person that is considered the source selection authority that looks at the feedback from those evaluators. And then typically they'll make a recommendation to select the company that the evaluators rate the highest, right? That's typically the case. But the source selection authority, if you have two vendors that are pretty close, right? And let's say their prices are close and their technical solutions are close. Well, now the source selection authority, government person, has to make a decision, right? So they have to spell out why they make the decision. They say, well, this technical factor here, we value that a little bit more than the price over here. So they have to spell that out clearly. So once you get down to that source selection authority, an award is made, and like I said, maybe you get protested, maybe you don't, but it's a long process to get into doing the work. So,
dude, I